The Chris Johnston Show.
Let's go!
Your number one destination for a behind-the-scenes look at the game of hockey.
Is this thing on?
Here's NHL insider Chris Johnston and host Julian McKenzie.
Connor McDavid with some pretty big comments yesterday, speaking again after the Oilers losing in the Cup final for the second consecutive year. Just going to read off a touch of some of the quotes that have been said that basically leave his future with the team a little open-ended. We're holding this together, trying to get it over the finish line. With that being said, ultimately still need to do what's best for me and my family, and that's who you have to take care of first. From another answer to another question, I believe that second one is from Daniel Nugent-Bowman, our colleague at The Athletic. If I feel there's a good window to win here over and over again, then signing is no problem. McDavid eligible to sign an extension as of July 1. What did you make of his press conference?
Well, I could see he left it open enough that if you wanted to take it in certain directions, you could. Here's where I believe the truth is. Connor McDavid does not want to leave Edmonton. This isn't someone who secretly has, I want to go play here. I want to do this. The guy couldn't be more open and honest and straightforward about what he wants. He wants to win a Stanley Cup. And so what I heard yesterday is someone who was saying, show me the path to a Stanley Cup, Edmonton. Sit down with me, make moves. Let's get busy here. And I think he could be, an Oiler for the next phase of his career at minimum, if not even longer than that. And so there's a whole ton of pressure on the whole organization to deliver that. Now, that being said, whether Connor McDavid made those comments or not, that was going to exist. We're talking about a team that just played for the Stanley Cup in back-to-back years. Clearly every aspect of the organization has been geared towards trying to achieve that goal. But I think that they got a bit of a dose of cold, hard reality in this most recent series with the Panthers. They clearly weren't as close in 2025 to winning the Cup as they were in 2024 when they played a Game 7 and lost 2-1. And I think on top of that, just had more stretches of that series where they were the better team than Florida. Edmonton was not the better team too often in this series. And so, I think that you could conclude based on watching that 12 months passed and the Oilers got a little farther away from their goal than they were even a year ago. And so this is a massive offseason. The Oilers don't have a ton of cap flexibility. They've got the oldest team in the league. Same oldest team that dragged them through 3 rounds, and they look pretty good, right? They got through Vegas and Dallas relatively easily, and those were 2 top-tier teams. But I do think that what I interpret from the comments is, first of all, no rush from McDavid's end. He wants to hear and see what the plan is. He's not signing that extension on July 1st, and I don't think anyone should necessarily be worried if he doesn't. But, this organization has to find a way to take a step forward before he's willing to make some kind of commitment. And I'll say this, when it comes time for him to make that commitment, I just wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at a short-term deal. Not because he's got one foot out the door, but I think it keeps his options open. It continues to apply that same pressure to the organization to be a contender. And, I don't think anyone who watches the playoffs doubts how competitive this guy is. I really think he would play on Mars if he thought that gave him the best chance to win a cup. He's built, but he's also, it's got to be said, he's put a lot of effort and energy into building up the Oilers team alongside Leon Draisaitl, who happens to be his best friend. He's put deep roots down the city. He's lived there 10 years already, and he's already under contract for an 11th next season. His wife, Lauren, just opened a bar, for example, in Edmonton. She's an entrepreneur, has a lot of different ventures. But, I just think that everything points to him wanting to stay, but they have to give him a reason to stay. And so what a big offseason ahead for the Oilers in a spot, admittedly, they don't have a lot of room to maneuver. We're not talking about them bidding for a Mitch Marner or, go to the top names on the free agent board. That's just not the sort of area they can shop in. But they have to turn this team over. They have to get younger and a little bit faster. And, they got to do it with a tough salary cap window to maneuver in.
So if Connor McDavid, whenever he decides to, let's say for argument's sake, signs a 3-year deal or a 4-year contract extension, that's chill? Everyone should just calm down? That's close to your expectation?
Well, look, you can view it as you want it. I think that we have to get used to the star players in this league signing shorter term. To me, in speaking with the people I do around the league, like the sense is with the cap starting to really ramp up here, that we might see more and more short-term deals for players. Like I'll tell you, my expectation is when Mitch Marner finds his new home, that it's not going to be on an 8-year contract. I think he's very open to listening to shorter-term deals. Wouldn't even surprise me if he does a 2-year deal, a 3-year deal, maybe a 4-year deal somewhere. But, again, it keeps open his optionality. It does a few things, right? This is for any player. This isn't specific to either Marner or McDavid. But if you sign a 2 or 3 year deal and you're one of the top players in the league, first of all, if the cap keeps ripping up, which it might, it gives you a chance to make a big jump in salary in a couple of years' time because you'll be, operating in a new environment at that point in time. Number 2, it maintains your optionality. It doesn't mean you have to leave where you are. It just gives you another kick at the can. And number 3, I do think it gives teams, it applies a certain pressure on a team, right? Like if you run a team and you have one of the absolute most special players or 2 of them on your roster, it just keeps the heat on there. You can't take for granted you have them both for 8 years. Leon Draisaitl's 8-year extension kicks in right now. So the Oilers know, in theory, they have him for the next 8 years. Now, of course, that could change in any situation too. And I'm not saying it will, but, I just think we should get used to maybe a little bit more what I'll call NBA style contracts. It's not going to be for everyone. I mean, hockey still is a very dangerous sport. It's one that I think players want to opt for security where they can get it because they just don't know what's going to happen with their health. And if you do get a long-term offer, it's hard to turn that down. But, McDavid's made a lot of money. And, as I say, it's like his career started here. He wanted to do all these things. Well, he's done most of them, right? He's down to this singular focus, and that's winning a cup. Obviously, he's going to continue to be paid handsomely while he tries to pursue that aim. But, it wouldn't even surprise me if he did something like a 2-year deal. And if he did that, for example, that still gives you 3 seasons starting next year. And I'm not saying that's the perfect number. I don't think he knows what that is yet, right? I mean, that's the other thing we should really reinforce here. I mean, none of this business has happened yet. Like they just finished the Stanley Cup final this week. And, while there have obviously been some high level conversations as things went along, they aren't down to work yet. And it might take some time. I mean, because we already are this late in June, for the front office, they got to navigate the draft, the early days of free agency, maybe a couple things happening on the trade market. It's quite possible they don't get down to business with McDavid until into July. That's kind of the way it went last year with Leon Draisaitl. His extension wasn't signed until September 3rd officially. I think it probably would have been done sooner, but the whole offer sheet thing threw a wrench into the goings on with that contract in August with St. Louis last year. But I guess my point is the softest deadline I could put out there would be the start of training camp. It doesn't mean a deal will get done by then, but that's probably in the back of everyone's mind. That's probably, if we're doing an extension, it would be nice to have it done by the start of camp because it just removes a discussion point, a distraction, whatever you want to call it. But, that's still several months away. I think that the Oilers probably have some more pressing business. And so, it's a little premature to say he's going to do it for this length or that length, but I would just think it's more likely than not we're talking about a shorter term deal. Because it maintains, it doesn't lock you into what could become a bad relationship. Again, I'm not saying it will, but when you sign any contract, Julian, I would say this to you, if you were taking on a new work, adventure, I would tell you, you also have to imagine when you're starting a relationship with the contract, you're imagining things go right, but you also have to imagine what happens if things go wrong. Like what does this mean? And so I think that a shorter term deal at this stage of McDavid's career would make a whole lot of sense. And he'll probably be the first guy to tell you he'd love to be an Oiler for life. That would mean that they went and won multiple cups and there was lots of reason to stay. But, at this point, they are an old organization that don't have a lot of young prospects coming. They've got a lot of work to do, but they also have 2 of the best players in the world in their absolute primes. And that's a great place to start.
The Oilers do have a lot of work to do. Speaking of pressing business, just listing off some of the UFAs, pending UFAs, I should say, for the Oilers. Corey Perry, Jeff Skinner, Connor Brown, Kasperi Kapanen, Trent Frederick. We know there's a reported deal out there for him, and I'd love for you to touch on that in your next answer. John Klingberg as well. What do you think of the job ahead for Stan Bowman in terms of the pending UFAs he has on his table, but also doing everything he can to build a team that will appease Connor McDavid and make him think he can win that.
Well, so the Trent Frederic deal, not confirmed on either side, but my understanding it's going to be $3.8 million times 8 for his contract. You know, it's the opposite approach of what I just outlined, why a player like McDavid might do a short-term deal. You know, that long-term security for Frederic is obviously appealing. He could have been an unrestricted free agent if he didn't negotiate with the Oilers. But, you know, getting that much security for a player that plays the way he does, I think is attractive. The reason that contract works for the Oilers is because over time, I do think that $3.8 million will look pretty inconsequential for what players are paid. But what it does in the short term, it gives the Oilers a little lower AAV for this coming season, next season. And that's really important for them because of that window that they're operating in. And, you know, what the Oilers have to do, I mean, the number one question, Stan Bowman speaking later today in Edmonton, that I'm curious to see how he answers it, is the goaltending. You know, I think that, you know, it's been an advantage for the Oilers in a sense because they only pay $3.6 million to Calvin Pickard and Stuart Skinner. You know, that's pretty low if you go around the league. I mean, Sergei Bobrovsky alone is making 3 times that on the Panthers cap. And so when you can have that level of goaltending, you get to the cup final, you know, that's great. I mean, because every team has to make, you know, cap decisions you make over here. Money you spend here is money you can't spend there, if you know what I'm saying. So every team is making those kind of bargains within their own system. But then the downside is now they've got to 2 straight cup finals and had the second best goaltending in the series by far. That's not to say it's the only reason Edmonton lost this final. I think that they didn't measure up in a number of areas. You know, not having Zach Hyman clearly hurt them. The Oilers' blue line started leaking oil. You just wonder if Matthias Ekholm in particular ever got healthy after, you know, fast tracking his return. I mean, there's lots of Florida was just a deeper, better team in every facet. But the goaltending is a hard one to ignore. And when you're going back and forth in a Stanley Cup final, not for health reasons, but performance reasons, I mean, it kind of tells you everything you need to know. You know, I think they need to hit a little bit stronger on their kind of bets, I'll call them. Like last year was Arvidsson and Jeff Skinner they brought in. I don't think you can call either of those a successful signing. Doesn't mean they were disastrous. I mean, Jeff Skinner did score 16 goals in the regular season, was, you know, barely played in the playoffs with the way things went. But, you know, I think ultimately an ideal summer, and this is high in the skying it, is finding a steady winger to play with Leon Draisaitl. I mean, creating 2 real top lines where you're not using McDavid and Draisaitl together very often is probably the optimal lineup they can hope for. And you know, you heard Draisaitl say it actually in his, you know, availability at Oilers Media Day there, is that, you know, he thinks they have to get younger and faster. And it's hard not to, you know, find the same conclusion as him. You know, how you do that, I think some of it is going to be either signings or trades that don't immediately pop as like, oh, wow, they got that guy. I think they have to kind of, as a lot of teams around the league, you have to mimic what Florida's done. I mean, they've just found all kinds of players. They're not all big names that can play, you know, in spots in their lineup, especially lower down. And I think Edmonton has to aim to do that. So, you know, it's going to be some hard decisions. I wonder if Evander Kane is back. You know, to me, signing Frederic does leave open the possibility that that's kind of a Kane light replacement, so to speak. You know, maybe there's a way that they move on from Evander's money just as a way to create cap space. But, you know, that's sort of where the main decisions lie to me, is goaltending, and then how do they find ways to improve that forward group, make sort of smart, not big money bets, but a few that maybe pay off a little more than the ones they did last year. And, you know, that's probably the best way forward. They've obviously, the one thing we haven't got to is Evan Bouchard is a restricted free agent. And so that's a big decision. Now, the one thing I'll point out on Bouchard, I've seen a lot of people say, well, they either got to sign him or trade him this summer. I actually think there's a third option there. He's 2 years out from potential unrestricted free agency right now. It's always possible they either sign him to a 1-year deal or go to arbitration to get a 1-year deal, and then basically delay the decision until next year. Now, obviously, Bouchard will get a raise in what he's currently earning in that scenario, but I still think there's a possibility they do a 1-year deal with Bouchard, and then next summer is when they really the rent comes due on that player and that contract. And again, you do that not because you don't like him or not because you're not willing to commit to him long term, but committing to him long term is an 8-figure contract, right? It's $10 million plus for Bouchard. And that might be too big a number to ram into next year's cap picture where it works. Whereas maybe in arbitration, it's something more like 7. I'm grasping at straws a little bit, but my point being, the cheaper, easier option might be just to do a 1-year deal and then revisit all this next summer. So there's a lot on the Oilers front office plate. And to me, they're one of the teams really to watch around the league because you're trying to get a little better after being pretty darn good for 2 years, and it's not going to be easy to do.
Yeah, you have outlined it perfectly. The Oilers definitely a team to watch. You mentioned Evander Kane. News dropping this week that the league was investigating the Oilers for their usage of LTIR with Evander Kane. Do we have any updates on that?
No way to push it forward. I mean, I can confirm Frank Saravalli's report that is indeed the case. The league's been looking into it and looking for sort of, I guess we'll call evidence or paperwork behind the scenes. Now, one thing I'll say is this has happened before. It's become so common for players to be on LTIR down the stretch of the season, for teams to use that cap space to make acquisitions at or around the trade deadline, and then players to be activated pretty soon as the playoffs start. I mean, we don't have to list through them all, but as you know, it's become a common practice. I mean, quite honestly, part of that, I think, is because the cap was so flat for so long that teams, got to a point where they were using every mechanism possible to build a better team, to get some cap flexibility. And, there was enough alarm from what the league was hearing from other teams. I think some other teams believed that Kane was actually healthy enough to play and not playing. And that's the reason for this investigation. But, as far as I know, it's still ongoing. I don't think there's been any conclusions reached, and we'll just have to see if there's punishment there. But, we should mention, I mean, there's, whether it was Max Pacioretty in Toronto, didn't play, till game 3 of the first round after being on LTR down the stretch, and the Leafs used that money to make trade deadline acquisitions, help me out. So there's a few other players here in a similar spot that didn't get back into the playoffs until game 2, as Kane did. So, the league has been, I will say, in the last couple of years, they sent memos around, the league has really been scrutinizing all of these situations. And, what's interesting is with the new CBA on the horizon, I think that there's going to be some kind of mechanism put in place where it's less of a concern, because there's going to be, something like a salary cap in the playoffs, or a different way to treat LTIR players when it gets to the playoffs. And so this might be the last time we're talking about it in this specific circumstances, but that's my understanding anyways of what's gone on with Kane and this quote unquote investigation.
Anything else from Oilers Corner that we need to go in on? We could even spend more time on Evan Bouchard. And I think it's fascinating, the idea that maybe a 1-year deal for him makes sense, and considering what he's meant to that team and considering how much money he could stand to make as a player. I think that's so fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, again, you're pushing the bigger decisions down the road by doing that. It's funny. It's actually the same principle that's at work with an 8-year Trent Frederick deal as a potential 1-year Evan Bouchard deal. You're trying to lower your cap commitment for next season. That's the beauty for me when you look at the Oilers. They literally, all that matters is next year. That's the window they're in, right? They've got to try to win a Stanley Cup next year. They got to find 2 more wins than they managed this last season, and 1 more win than they managed 2 years ago. They want to be the ones ripping around nightclubs and driving golf carts around downtown Edmonton like the Panthers have been the last couple of days. And so I think it wouldn't, again, it's not because they don't like the player. I don't want there to be any confusion about that. I just think there might be a way to delay, to some degree, the kind of cap hit that Evan Bouchard's going to end up on. So, I've seen a lot of this. They either have to pay him finally now or trade him. That's not true. There is a third option. It's probably arbitration. It's not always nice when you go through that with a player, but doing so might get you a 1-year award that basically gives you a year to make that decision. So stay tuned on that one.
Okay. The Oilers think about tomorrow. The Panthers think about right now. You've probably seen them celebrating on the streets as a defending Stanley Cup champion, 2nd straight year in a row. What a series for them, obviously. The big clip going around from yesterday, Sam Bennett at the club telling everybody He's not effing leaving. It's pretty big from Sam Bennett, who could stand to make a ton of money on the open market. So many decisions for Bill Zito and the Florida Panthers. What did you make of Sam Bennett and his comments and how the Florida Panthers have been partying the last how many hours?
Well, I'll say this. I've never been to 11 nightclub in Miami, but based on all the social media clips, it looks like quite a place. And I will say this. Anytime I've been anywhere like that in my life at that late of hour when that clip was posted, I don't think you should hold anyone to what they say at that point in time, which is, it's not to say that he is leaving, but he's not necessarily staying either. I mean, there's no contract done. Those conversations continue. You know, I think it's pretty clear he's wrapped up in the moment. I mean, he's just won a second straight Stanley Cup. He won the Conn Smythe Trophy. He and his brothers are out there just ripping it up, having a good time. You can understand he's probably getting even some subtle, if not direct. You know, Sam Reinhart standing beside him in a Suomi jersey when he says that in the clip. You know, Sam Reinhart himself signed a deal around midnight on June 30th last year to stay in Florida. You can imagine he's in his ear. You know, let's keep the band together. I think it's clearly what Sam Bennett would prefer, but you know, at some point in time, he's going to wake up, mix in a few waters, go for a walk on the beach, and maybe clear his head and have to make a business decision, right? He and his family. And the good thing I'd say for Sam Bennett compared to last year is they won the cup a little sooner in June, Julian. So, you know, he's got a few more days where he can party before the business decisions have to come. You know, it was like June 25th last year that the Oilers and Panthers finished off that series. You know, they had the parade on June 30th in Fort Lauderdale. And then, you know, the next day, like 7 players signed with other teams. You know, there's still time here for the business to get going. But look at the Panthers in general. I just put out a new free agent board at The Athletic. 3 of the top 4 players on that board are Panthers. And I think if you ordered them in an order of priority for the organization, Sam Bennett is at the top of the list to try to bring back. And so there's every reason to believe they'll find a way to make it happen, given I think he's that important to the Panthers and given that he's on stage saying, I'm not effing going anywhere. But, you know, at this point in time, that hasn't happened yet. And, you know, I think Florida is going to do what they can to try to keep all of Sam Bennett, Aaron Ekblad, and then Brad Marchand. I don't know if it's going to be possible with their cap space, but, you know, you look at how that team, it'd be hard to leave that team right now, too, is I guess what I'm saying is look at where they live, look at how they play together, look at the bond. I mean, I know we're a few days beyond it. I have to say, being around that cup pass and on the ice on Tuesday at Amerant Bank Arena, like I've never seen anything like that. To see the Stanley Cup go from Alexander Barkov to Nate Schmidt to Seth Jones to Thomas Nosek fourth, Vitek Vanacek, their backup goaltender, didn't play for them in the playoffs, to AJ Greer, Jesper Boqvist, Maki Samoskevich, Uvis Balinskis, Jacob Magna, and Evan Cormier before it got to any of the players that, you know, were what we'll call the stars of the show. You know, Evan Cormier, I believe, is basically the 5th string goaltender in Florida's system. The Charlotte Checkers are still playing right now for the Calder Cup, so he's been up as their 3rd stringer because, you know, the goalie's ahead of him in the system. You know, were required in the AHL. He played like 35 games for the Savannah Ghost Pirates this year, and he's getting the Stanley Cup on the ice for his cup pass before Sam Bennett, who wins a Conn Smythe Trophy, before Sam Reinhart, who scored 4 goals in the clinching game, you know, before all these other players, Carter Verhaeghe and Marchand himself. I mean, it just says something about who that team is. I mean, I think a lot of teams talk about being close, and I believe every team that wins the Stanley Cup, you are going to form some kind of, you know, special chemistry in doing so. But the Panthers took that to another level, and I think that they were a deeper, better team. I think there's a case to be made that they're the best team of the cap era, quite honestly. If you look at a lot of the numbers, how many goals they scored, how few they gave up, the fact that their third line, you know, with Brad Marchand on the ice in the playoffs, it was 21 goals for, 7 against. I mean, having that from your third line is like, that's just impossible. Like, how could any team measure up to that? And obviously nobody did ultimately. So, you know, pretty special group and a special bond. You're seeing that play out on all, like, their celebration videos are tremendous to watch. And so I think we extend now towards the offseason, it's tough to walk away from that if you're one of those players.
If you're Bill Zito right now and you had to find a way, even though it's probably not likely that you're going to be able to keep all three of Marchand, Bennett, and Ekblad, who would you try to keep?
Well, I think Bennett first and foremost. The only concern with Ekblad is the length of contract. There's a lot of hard miles on his body. He even made a comment earlier in the Cup final. I've given my body for the Florida Panthers, so to speak. I mean, we know he wants to stay. I think certainly they'd be interested in keeping him, but if you're talking maximum term deal, that probably makes the organization a little nervous. Brad Marchand might have been the perfect Florida Panther. I mean, I can't think he's already the gold standard for trade deadline pickups, in my opinion. I know there have been other players. You can go back to even Marian Gaborik 10 years ago in LA. Like, there have been other players that have made a big impact, but the way Marchand just stepped in that lineup and took them to another level, changed that third line, seemed to embody the exact ethos of that team. Like, it's pretty impressive to see. And, do you know they paid him something like $105,000 in salary? Like, I mean, again, in the context, that's a lot of money for you or I, but like in the context of this sport, they paid him next to nothing. They only gave up a first round pick in the future, right? It's not even this year. It's 27 or 28 first round pick. I mean, that's like trading away. Like, it's not even a concern if you're Florida, and to get that kind of performance out of him, I can understand why they would want to keep him too. I just think for Marchand, as we've discussed before, this is his last opportunity truly to get a big deal. And there's probably more money on the table for him somewhere else. But we'll see how that plays out. I mean, there's still 10 days to where he's still property of the Florida Panthers, where they can try to put something in front of him that maybe entices him not to look at the open market. But, I think Bennett is the one for them to prioritize, and that's the one they are. So sort of 1, 2, 3 is Bennett, Ekblad, Marchand.
Did you say 105 or 150?
105.
$105,000 for Brett Marchand. I mean, I get that's how it works in that situation, but that's not a lot of money. That's why I was surprised. Holy crap.
And did you know also he was one of the absolute last players traded on deadline day? He wasn't the last, but it was one of the trades that got in a little under the wire. Paul Maurice has told the story to the media a few times covering the Stanley Cup, where he was like leaving the office and like, wait a minute, don't go anywhere just yet. And didn't have any idea that Brad Marchand might be joining his roster until 2:30 or 2:40 before the 3 p.m. deadline back on March 7th. And so, I mean, seriously, what an absolute home run. Rick Dudley is a longtime senior manager around the league, been a general manager. He's the senior advisor to Bill Zito. I talked to him on the ice when the Panthers won the Cup and just asked about Marchand. And he's involved in a lot of these discussions. And he said, Bill Zito absolutely targeted that guy. He's like, and what a call. He said, I don't think we're here without Marchand, which says something. Because keep in mind, as dominant as the Panthers were, there were points where they, before they sort of fully spread their wings and became what they could be, where they might have got tripped up, specifically in that Toronto series in the second round. And so, anyway, that was the level of impact Marchand had. I'm not going to totally close the door on him staying, but it's definitely possible.
What did you think of Brad Marchand's Instagram stories yesterday, where he was showing everyone on the team and he was saying thanks to all the teams who essentially helped build the Panthers?
Well, that's legend status right there. I thought it was hilarious. I liked how with some of them, like Carter Verhaeghe, mixed in like the ECHL teams and the AHL teams. He called Forsling the waiver god or waiver something. That's a guy having a good time. He's going around. Clearly, they were all at dinner together because all the photos are taken in the same spot. And he's doing that. I don't know if you saw, but Alexander Barkov took a picture of Marchand, took a picture and said, "Thank you, NHL Bruins." So, I mean, look, these guys are having fun. I think it's pretty harmless fun. I will say, though, someone texted me and pointed out that whether it was Carter Verhaeghe or Evan Rodriguez or maybe even Paul Maurice, that Marchand didn't troll the Leafs in any of the players that came through the Leafs organization. And so they were wondering if maybe he was reluctant to do that, given the possibility Toronto is a team knocking on his door on July 1st.
I mean, technically the shrapnel still hits Brad Treliving because Sam Bennett and Matthew Tkachuk are on the Florida Panthers because of trades made by Brad Treliving.
Well, that's you saying that. He didn't call out Brad directly. He just said, thank you, NHL Flames. Like, I mean,
very good point. It's a very good
point. I'm just saying, like, he didn't go after anyone in particular. I think that's what's great about it. He didn't, even then, like, he was having fun with it. I mean, and look I will say this. I'm not a fan, but I do think fans, when you, like, if you're whatever, let's say you're a Flyers fan, probably part of you is like a little happy to see Sergei Bobrovsky, have success. Like, I don't think you're taking that as like, oh, this is awful. It's nice to see players go on and win somewhere else that maybe you invested some fandom into. So I that's why I think it wasn't mean towards anyone. I even said thank you, Dale Talon, to a couple of the players left over from Talon's time as GM. So, I think it was good, clean fun. But all I'm saying is he didn't mention the Leafs with any of the people if he wanted to throw a little bit in Toronto. He passed on that.
That's a very fair point. And I think it's really good fun too. It's always great whenever we see personality from any of the players in the National Hockey League. Anything you want to mention from your free agent board? I know we touched on the 3 Florida Panthers in the top 5. Mitch Marner, of course, at number 1. John Tavares is on that list as well. Nick Ehlers, Brock Besser, Gavrikov, Provorov. We don't have to spend too long, but anything else you'd like to mention from the free agent board, which you can check out at the Athletic?
No, nothing in particular. I mean, look, there's not a lot happening there. There's been a few names come off. Obviously, Matt Duchene signed an extension in Dallas. He'd been pretty high on that board, roughly 10th spot prior to that. I do expect Trent Frederick's still on it officially as of this morning, but I expect that he'll be coming off. And, it's going to be a big week to 10 days now towards free agency. I mean, as much as this has all been bubbling in the background, obviously these free agents themselves have had a lot on their minds since their seasons ended. Now it comes into focus what's going to happen, and we'll go from there. So I don't really have any like pressing updates yet on the top names available, other than those Panthers guys who obviously, once they sober up, are going to have some decisions to make with Bill Zito.
For sure. We should get to some other news and notes. We should touch on the Dallas Stars, who signed Matt Duchene 4 years, $4.5 million. They trade Mason Marchment over to Seattle for a 3rd and a 4th round pick. What's next for them? They don't have a ton in cap space still under $5 million in that regard. What's next for Jim Nill and the Stars?
Well, yeah, they have the least cap space of any team, even with the big jump coming to $95.5 million next season. So when they made the Duchene extension, that was done already knowing that they were going to be able to trade Mason Marchment. It's a direct trade of contract space, I guess, because $4.5 million was what Marchment was due to earn next season. Seattle takes all that on. And so, I think Dallas is going to make at least one more deal of that type. They've got to free up more space. I think that there is probably a market out there for Matt Dumba, who, I know was a frequent scratch in the playoffs for the Stars, but his name is kind of out there a little bit as someone who might be moved on from. They need to create some flexibility here. Now that they have a great team, I think that's the good news, but they still have to sign Jamie Benn, who I believe will stay on something approaching a team friendly deal. I don't believe he's likely to move on at this point in time, but Dallas is, the flip side to making the moves they did. They signed Wyatt Johnston to an extension. At the same time, they signed Mikko Rantanen and traded for him at the deadline. And, that's eaten up a lot of the cap space they would have had this summer, but two pretty good players too. They're looking to find a way, much like I was speaking about Edmonton off the top, to win more games, a few more games next year. I mean, 3 straight trips to the Western Conference Final is pretty impressive for that organization, but, they need to find a little bit more. And I think that's going to be some subtraction in the short term, so that they can add a bit more talent beyond that.
Okay. It's just, again, we've mentioned the Dallas Stars at different points and what they could be doing. I mean, I'm sure some of the rumors going around will continue about players like Jason Robertson. Maverick Bourque looks like an offer sheet candidate. That's a team we're going to be talking about a lot going into July 1.
I'll say this on Robertson. I think that they looked out there to see what might be available with what might be there for him. I don't think he's likely to be moved now. I mean, you're not going to close the book entirely, but I think that was more of a due diligence thing than we have to trade this player thing. And so the fact that they've now moved Marchman instead, I think tells you that they're moving forward in that direction. As I said, they have both Dumba and Ilya Lyubushkin as potential guys that can move off the blue line. I think Dumba is more likely to go at this point in time to create another $3+ million in cap space. We'll see if there's other ways that they can create some room. But, I don't think major surgery is happening in Dallas. I'd call this more, so I guess it's something more than tinkering, but something less than like blowing it all up, because they have had a roster that's won a ton of games and been pretty close to the top of the mountain here the last few years.
Okay. Give me a brief Leafs corner. What are you hearing on RFA Matthew Knies?
Yeah, I think everyone's going to need to be patient on that one. I don't know why everyone's freaking out just yet, but look, if you're Knies, the Leafs own your rights. Nothing's changed in that I believe he wants to be a Maple Leaf, but I get the sense that he and his camp are fine to wait till July to reach a deal here. I mean, for them, there isn't necessarily urgency to sign a contract. Once they get beyond July 1st, of course, that's when teams could technically enter into discussions with them for him to sign an offer sheet. He has to want to sign it. But if you get to that point, you can at least maybe even hear where other teams see your value, right? And so, the Leafs have a lot of balls in the air between trying to move out some of their own players. I think that, guys like Kelly Yarncroke or David Kampf could be potentially moved to create some extra flexibility. Obviously, negotiations continue with John Tavares. They've got to sign Matthew Knies as a restricted free agent, and then they've got to, find a way to start using the cap space they're going to get when Mitch Marner officially departs as a free agent. So there's a fair number of moving parts with the Leafs, but I still don't see them as vulnerable to an offer sheet for Knies. Even in if someone comes at him with an absolutely crazy offer, they're still going to have the cap space to match it. They just have to decide: do we want to commit that cap space or take the draft picks? And I think for them not to want to match it, I think it's got to be like a $10 million offer or something like that. In which case you're talking multiple first rounders. And, so I don't think we should, I guess it would be going too far to jump to that conclusion. I just think that this one's going to take a little bit more time. Of course, things can change with one phone call. Maybe an offer comes in the next few days and Matthew Knies and his camp sign it right away. But, my sense of that negotiation is that it's just kind of playing at a slow rate. But, it doesn't even become a worry unless we get to September 10th and camp opens in a week and he doesn't have his deal. But even then, we've seen lots of players, sign a few days into camp and it's almost like forgotten about. So I think you have to recognize he's an RFA and he likes Toronto. The Leafs like him. But both sides are probably looking for a little leverage to get the best deal possible. And right now they don't have that.
Is there a dollar amount in your mind that makes sense for Matthew Knies, or anything you might have heard that might be closer to what the Leafs might want or what Knies might want?
Well, every contract is a little bit difficult right now because the cap world is changing, right? It would be hard for me to see him making more than Wyatt Johnston, for example, who's a similarly drafted player who's put up better numbers. I believe, did he come in at 8.5? I want to say on his deal. Now he only did a 5-year deal in Dallas, so that's the difference too. I mean, I think where the term ends up here has a big swing in terms of what the AAV is, but other players like Matt Boldy, have similar kind of platform years. He did a long-term deal in Minnesota. So in the past, this has been a player that can get somewhere, I'd say 7 to 8 million if it's a long-term deal. What I don't know is, given that we're going into a different cap world, obviously I would expect at this point in time his camp is pushing for more than that. But that's where the negotiation lies. And ultimately there's always the option to do a shorter term contract, which sort of delays the big decision till down the road, but keeps the AAV in the near term at a lower number. And so, I'll have to see how that develops. I don't think that, I'm sure for Matthew Knies, the ideal number is something like a 5-year deal, because like Wyatt Johnston got, because that walks you basically to unrestricted free agency at a young age. teams don't tend to want to do those types of contracts. We've seen some do it in the past, but I don't know where that dollar figure is going to end up. But I think $8 million is a good number on a long-term deal. But I'm sure Knies camp is asking for more, and I'm sure the Leafs are saying it should be a bit less than that. And that's kind of where the negotiation lies.
Wyatt Johnston, $8.4 million is his cap hit. You weren't that far off.
Right. And Knies had a 29-goal season last year. And if you do a short-term deal, maybe he doesn't hit 29 goals the next year, right? Like, it's hard to say, like, there's always risk on both sides of the table when you get into these sorts of things. So I'm not at a point yet where I want to sound any alarms on it. I think we should expect it will get done at some point in July, and it's still June. So let's chill out, everybody. There's some other decisions that are more pressing, I think, in the meantime.
Yes. Let's move on to the island. What are you hearing about another RFA, Noah Dobson?
Well, one of the big first decisions for Matthew Darche, in taking over the Islanders, I think, he's certainly interested in trying to extend Noah Dobson. Now, he's in a different spot, say, than Evan Bouchard, because he's only 1 year away from unrestricted free agency. So that means a 1 year deal really doesn't make a lot of sense, I would say, for the Islanders, because you'd have a player who could essentially walk out the door for nothing a year from now. And, it's going to be a big contract for him. I think, like Bouchard, it probably gets to 8 figures, probably gets to a $10 million type of number plus if it's a long-term deal. And so, those conversations, my understanding, are ongoing and have started. And I do think there's a world that if they don't get somewhere where both sides are ready to sign a contract, the Islanders will have to think about trading Noah Dobson. That's not on the forefront right now, but I think it's almost one or the other in this case, because the 1 year option isn't there for the sides. It doesn't make as much sense. You're either making a big commitment now, and if you don't want to make that commitment, then you're probably leaving it to someone else to sign that kind of deal with him. So, right shot defenseman, put up a lot of points at a really attractive age. I could see him being a cornerstone piece for the Islanders moving forward, and I think they'd like him to be, but they got to get to a deal that makes sense. And it's, as I say, it's going to be an eye-opening number if they do sign that contract in the near future here.
Okay. Before we get to stick taps, anything on some of the flurry of activity we've seen post Stanley Cup final? We know with the Senators, they signed Fabian Zetterlund to a contract yesterday. There was a trade with the Predators in New Jersey involving Eric Haula. Any other thoughts on some of the other bit of business we've seen the last few days?
Well, it started. This is the fun time. If your team hasn't played a game in a long time, you've been waiting for this time of year for it to get going. And so off we go here. I think this is a fascinating offseason. I don't see too many teams that are in pure rebuild mode. And so there's a lot of competition out there to add talent and add players. I think we'll see quite a bit more on the trade front for that reason, but also obviously you have teams looking to create some cap room, as New Jersey did, as Dallas did with the Marchment deal, as I think Edmonton will try and Toronto will try, and other sort of cap committed teams. And yeah, I mean, no hot takes on that Zetterlund deal. I think clearly you're closer to that team than me. I mean, what was your take on that bit of business?
To that list of teams you're talking about that might try for a trade, I still feel like Ottawa, you could put that on that list. I'm not saying they might absolutely do a trade. It's just, if you look at the cap space they have, where they're short of 11 million, they still have to figure out if Claude Giroux is going to sign there or not. Depending on how much money they have left, that's not going to leave them the most amount of space to go on the free agent market and get a big marquee player of value. And they're open to everything, but they want to make deals that make sense. And Steve Staios has shown he's been able to make trades before. So I'm putting them on that list of teams to watch out for a trade. I could totally see them doing that. I don't mind the Fabian Zetterlund deal. You can go on the SDPN YouTube channel for my thoughts on that. But yeah, I think if he pans out to being a 15, 20 goal player, that deal makes sense for them as a player. That's my 2 cents on that. We're all just waiting on Claude Giroux in Ottawa in terms of when he'll sign, if he'll sign at this point.
I told you it's way more likely that it happens than it doesn't. So
I'm with you on that. Like, when you said that told me then all right, I should expect a deal. I'm going with you on that.
But I mean, look, it's getting down to crunch time, right? A lot of players in the similar boat. The Florida guys, John Tavares with Toronto, Giroux in Ottawa, as I mentioned, Jamie Benn in Dallas. Like, I think there's a lot of players that are likely to stay where they are, but now, the pressure gets ramped up closer to July 1st because obviously teams have to put their best offer forward and try to get those players signed. And if not, they have to start looking in other directions. And so I think it's going to be a big week here. I didn't even mention Jonathan Taves. I know we talked about him earlier in the week. I still think he's going to get close to what will be a handshake deal initially with the team he's going to return to the NHL with because he can't officially sign his deal till July 1st. So the news is going to keep coming right up till our next episode.
Oh, absolutely. Do you have a stick tap before we wrap up?
I came unprepared, buddy. Do you got one?
I was going to give it and use it for both of us for Brad Marchand and the Instagram stories. I really thought that was really funny. It's not just you who comes unprepared to these stick taps. Sometimes I do too.
I've been sick. I mean, that's why we're late today. Thanks for our listeners for their patience. But I got a viral infection on my way on the Stanley Cup trail here. So,
without going into too much detail, I can't believe we're doing a show today. I can't believe we're doing a show today, man. The stick tap should go to you, honestly, for playing through your viral infection game.
No. But if you're going to give it to Brad Marchand, I'll add on. I just want to stick tap him for all dealings with him during the playoffs. I mean, this guy, I realize the average fan probably doesn't care about the media-player relationship, and especially when media wants to complain about access or things like that. But it would be the opposite with Brad Marchand. I mean, he's so open, so accommodating, so funny. Like he really brings a certain spirit to those interactions, and he makes it easier for us to do our jobs too. And so having been around the Panthers for 4 or 5 weeks this spring, I was reminded of just how nice it is to have a player who brings such openness and honesty to those chats. So stick tap for that too, Brad. I appreciate it.
Awesome. Brad Marchand getting all the love on today's edition of the CJ Show. Get your questions in for our Monday episode for Ask CJ. We'll tackle as many as we can. Subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already, and enjoy your weekend. Get some rest, CJ.
Thanks, buddy.
The Chris Johnston Show. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris and follow Julian @JKA McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.